Hello, everyone, and welcome to another environmental justice episode of Virginia Interfaith Live with VICPP's partner organization, Virginia Interfaith Power Light. My name is Leah Jones. I'm VAIPL's Faith Community Outreach Coordinator. Thank you all for joining us today to have our second discussion on the human right to water. In our last episode of Environmental Justice Now, we were able to take, a bit of a deep dive to understand the human right to water generally and as an environmental justice issue, globally as well as here at home in Virginia. So on today's show, we have Jorge Aguilar, and the Southern Region Director at Food and Water Watch, along with our co-director here at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, Faith Harris. Today, these two will be in conversation to further discuss issues regarding the human right to water, and especially how these issues are affecting local communities here in Virginia. But before we get started, we would like to call back to our last show for a moment and share the video that we played to introduce this topic and provide a bit of a refresher on, what it means when we're talking about the human right, to water. So.
You might have heard that we're running out of fresh water. This might sound strange to you because if you live in a place where water flows freely from the tap or shower at any time, it sure doesn't seem like a big deal. It's just there, right? Wrong. The only obvious thing about fresh water is how much we need it. Because it's essential to life, we need to think about it carefully. Right now, at this very moment, some people, women and girls in particular, walk hours and miles per day to get fresh water. And even then, it may not be clean. Every 15 seconds, a child dies due to waterborne diseases. This is tragic. The most compelling reasons to think about fresh water therefore have to do with what we might call the global common good. This is not something we normally think about, but it means recognizing how much fresh water matters for the flourishing of human and non-human life on Earth, now and in the future. How do we think about something as local as our faucets and as global as fresh water? Is there a connection between them? Many people assume that fresh water shortages are due to individual wastefulness, running the water while you brush your teeth, for example, or taking really long showers. Most of us assume, therefore, that water shortages can be fixed by improving our personal habits, taking shorter showers, or turning off the water while we brush our teeth. But global fresh water scarcity neither starts nor ends in your shower. Globally, domestic use of fresh water accounts for only 8% of consumption. 8%! Compare that to the 70% that goes to agriculture and the 22% that goes to industrial uses. Now, hold up. You're not off the hook. Individual habits are still part of the puzzle. You should still cultivate water virtue in your daily life. Turn off the tap when you brush your teeth. But still, it's true. Taking shorter showers won't solve global problems, which is too bad. It would be much more straightforward and easier if virtuous individual actions could do the trick. You'd just stand there for 30 seconds less and you'd be done with that irksome planet-saving task for the day. Well, that's not so much the case. Agricultural and industrial patterns of water use need serious attention. How do our societies value water, distribute it, subsidize its use in agriculture, incentivize its consumption or pollution? These are all questions that stem from how we think about fresh water's value. Is it an economic commodity? A human right? A public good? Nobel Prize winners, global water justice activists, transnational institutions like the United Nations, and even the Catholic Church are at work on the issue. But it's tricky, too, because the business of water became very profitable in the 20th century. And profit is not the same thing as the common good. We need to figure out how to value fresh water as a public good, something that's vital for human and non-human life now and in the future. Now that's a virtuous, collective task that goes far beyond your shower.
So now that we've had a chance to ground our conversation in the idea of values and values for water, let me introduce today our guest, Jorge Aguilar. He is the Southern Region Director and oversees food and Food and Water Watch's campaign in the Southeast region. He has worked to defeat major water privatization projects in the Southeast, and he has led the successful legislation campaign in Maryland to ban the use of arsenic in chicken production and the ban on fracking. So welcome, Jorge. We're very happy to have you today as our guest on our Virginia Interfaith Power and Light live show. So welcome.
Hi, Faith.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy that we are able to have you to start to help us kick off our conversation. I want to just jump right in here because we do have a limited time, but let me just say that one of the things I think that video did provide for us is a really good grounding and helping us to think about water more personally, but also to think about it as a global issue. That in fact, we are very fortunate in the West, in the United States, and in other developed countries to be able to walk to a room in our house or several rooms in our house and have access to clean water and affordable water. And I just want you to talk about a little bit more about what is the value of water. And why is it important for us to ground our conversation in the value of water? And why are you passionate about this issue?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of really phrasing this question. And there's two parts to really the value of water. And as the video makes clear, water is the most essential resource we have. It is what ensures life. It's what we use every day, right, to prepare food, clean ourselves, bathe ourselves. And during this pandemic, the number one health recommendation is to wash your hands. And so what is the value of water? Well, it's everything. Right? We can't live without it. The sad part of the pandemic is that even though we're in the middle of it and getting through this health crisis is the number one public health goal, we must also make sure we address the water crisis we are having in the country. So even pre-pandemic, the issue of water scarcity, water access, water affordability were major issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I want to share something I actually saw in kind of looking at the Water as a Human Right campaign here in Virginia. So in September 2020, the National Academy of Science did a big study on water insecurity in the U.S. and found that almost 500 U.S. households, that's about 1.1 million people, do not have access to running water in the U.S. So that's a terrible and tragic number. About half of those folks were in the 50 largest metro areas that include places in the mid-Atlantic like Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Richmond, and Virginia Beach. So again, that speaks to really a crisis that we have. The second part of the question of what is the value of water has to do with real attempts by big companies, big corporations who actually want to put a price on water itself because they believe that by putting a price of water on commodifying it, it will ensure that it's more valued. And we totally reject that concept because water is a public good that should not be owned by companies who want to trade it on a stock market type of exchange where, right, the general public good is not the number one actual goal. The goal is making money. So that's the second part that we also need to discuss as we talk about making sure everybody has access to safe, clean, affordable water. And I know I said a lot there, but it's just so much to unpack.
Yeah, there is a lot. There's a great deal to unpack, and I think just sitting with the information that you gave, that you shared about. I think did you say 1.5 million people who live in the United States, and they actually also live in densely populated centers, are do not have access to water. That's kind of eye-opening, and it should actually cause all of us to pause, as we go to our water faucets to get water or to wash dishes or to wash our hands, that there are so many of our neighbors who are without that privilege and that opportunity, and that access. And I think we all were, made aware of that for local areas like Petersburg over the last several months, because we know there were several households there that had no access to water, and that it was exacerbated because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the reality is that I'm not comfortable. I don't know about others, but I'm not comfortable knowing that my neighbors don't have access to some of the very life-giving resources that all of us should, in fact, have access to. So that's what makes me passionate about this issue, that I care about and am concerned about what happens to my neighbors. So this is what makes, I guess, going to the second question is, this is what makes water a human rights issue. The reality that some have it and some don't. And what other things do you think might make it a human rights issue for you?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it is over 1 million people in the U.S. that don't have access to water. I point out, in fact, that residents without piped-in water are about 35% more likely to be people of color, and 61% more likely to rent rather than own a dwelling. So it affects a particular demographic more than others. So the truth is, when we're talking about water access, that's the one issue. But the other thing about it is generally that this has been exacerbated by the shutoff situation. We've actually at Food and Water Watch been really following the conversation around shutoffs. At least 584 municipalities across the state have put in a moratorium, right, a stop on any water shutoffs. And that's protecting about 137 million people. That's about 40% of Americans. So that's a good thing. But about 190 million people across the U.S. are at risk for shutoffs. Right now, only California, New York, New Jersey, Vermont, Washington, Wisconsin, and D.C. Have actually stopped any shutoffs. Virginia actually just passed something in the special session to stop shutoffs too. So it would be one of those cities that would also not do shutoffs right now. So the shutoffs are going on. And so to me, this is a human rights issue. As we hopefully get through this pandemic in 2021, we will still have to deal with a lot of water issues to ensure that residents in Virginia, but residents all across the country, have access to water.
So, Jorge, what's the reason for these shutoffs? How did they start? Did they start with the pandemic, or did they start somewhere else?
No, they don't start with the pandemic. In a typical year before the pandemic, an estimated 15 million people experienced a water shutoff in the U.S. That's 1 in 20 households. And so this is something that I think all of us in the U.S. have to actually really, really address. We think that water shutoffs over an inability to pay are always a human rights violation. And the global pandemic underscores what is at stake when people are denied the resource that they need to live simply for not being able to pay or for being poor.
One of the things that I often think about when we're talking about this situation with water shutoffs or just water access and affordability, generally is I remember watching this series that was on PBS several years ago, and it talked about like it was really about, I don't remember the title, but it was really about how the United States became what it is today, how it developed cities, and how different utilities and different ways in which we have access to some of the things that we think we should have access to, for instance, water in our homes. So there was a time about 120 years ago, approximately, where people did not have water, and that cities and organizations took it on, made it a priority to ensure that water was affordable and accessible and available to everyone, mostly because it was a human rights issue or a common good issue, but also because it meant that cities and municipalities could actually organize themselves and continue and not be in constant chaos because of sharing of germs and death that pretty much we think about when we think about the 18th and 19th centuries. And so one of the scenarios that you're conjuring for me is this idea of, if we're not careful, we could go back to a time when where many people in these densely populated areas will not have access to water. And I just can't imagine the kinds of pandemics and the kinds of waterborne and foodborne diseases that we would see resurgence of. So you're just really kind of painting a picture for me that helps me to think about, like, we've made such great progress in kind of normalizing and making certain resources equitable on a certain level, but now we seem to be going backwards and allowing for industry to in fact make these things like water, make these resources like water, very important resource, inaccessible for some. I don't like the idea that maybe people right here in my own community may not have access to water because they can't afford it. So I think that's a really important visual or picture for us to be thinking about.
And Faith,
go ahead.
As you say this, it's not just water access. And what you're pointing to is that, the water utility and the systems that have been built out by the U.S. in order to guarantee that Americans and residential communities and business and agriculture have access to water is one of the foundational, I guess, principles of a civilization. It's what's made this country great, but it's what's made really the world advance in the way that it has. The reality is that most of the water pipes, though, under our streets were built at least half a century ago, in the years immediately following World War II. In some places, it's 150, 200 years old. And this infrastructure is wearing out. Many water pipes already are reaching their end of their usefulness. But every year there's 24,000 water main breaks. We lose 2 trillion gallons of drinking water just on leaks. And we as a society in the US are just not investing enough in modernizing, replacing, and just providing general maintenance for these water systems. There's an estimate that we need to invest in about $35 billion a year over the next 20 years to really modernize our system. So the issue of water access, water scarcity is running up against this reality of an aging infrastructure that must also be addressed if we are to meet the goal of water as a human right.
And I think that's really important, Jorge, not to only think about it from the perspective of our vantage point here in the United States, but tell us, what does this? I know Food and Water Watch works, around the world, and so give us a bird's eye view or an overview of the importance of water globally. The video talked about it a little bit, but tell us a little bit more. You're on mute.
We're really lucky, I think, in the U.S. generally that have we have relied on these systems that have been built out, like I said, 50, 100 years ago, to provide drinking water and quality drinking water. Around the world, that is not not as much of a given. So in fact, Food and Water Watch works with several networks, particularly in South America. We're part of a network called Red Vida, the Life Network, that's looking at these issues in a similar way in terms of making sure that the water scarcity that is often much more like it's much worse than it is in the U.S. is addressed, but where we have seen a lot more of these like private interests and corporations moving in to privatize water utilities. So while in the U.S. about 89 to 90% of the American public gets their water from a public utility, around the world, that number is a little bit lower. And there's been a lot more aggressiveness in private entities being able to make the case that they will control the water resource and they will make the best choices for residents in providing that quality water. But yeah, it is an issue internationally, and the United Nations has spoken to this issue. This is, again, pre-pandemic, has been a crisis as water becomes an even more of a scarcity around the world.
What's the danger in privatization? What's the danger in privatization?
The reality right now that a lot of municipalities face, and like I said, there's been a shortfall in investment in public utilities. So for instance, Petersburg, the city of Petersburg has thought of privatizing. There's a community in the shore, Cape Charles, it's also thinking about privatizing. And they often think that a private company can come in with a big cash influx to really address the issue. And we think that's a problem. The reason it's not a good idea for a community to privatize is that rates are usually much higher because you are bringing in a private company that expects profits as well as other taxes and fees that come with privatization. So rates go up. In cost-cutting measures, then the private facility will also then look at how to limit staff, right, in the utility, as well as cutting back benefits. So you're working with usually a smaller staff level for that utility. And they also go with finding cheaper materials in building out the water utility infrastructure. Again, because their number one priority is making a profit. Last reason that we think it's a really bad thing is that it takes away local control. So a resident with any water issues can usually go to City Hall, go to a council member, local official to say, hey, I'm having this issue. Once a private company takes over, it is way more difficult. These decisions often get made in a corporate boardroom. There's a regulatory sort of process in place that's much, much more opaque and harder for any individual citizen to navigate. And so that loss of local control and the ability to make decisions about a community's water really gets passed on from what would be the municipal citizenry to really a corporation and in making decisions about that water.
So Virginia Interfaith Power and Light is a faith organization, and we, of course, organize with all different faith groups. And one of the things that we often talk about when we're talking about water is how important water is to most faith traditions. That most faith traditions have some ritual or some way in which water is prominent and is prominently used and is seen as actually sacred. And so that's another reason why I would like to raise for why we do not want to privatize water. In some ways, it's almost like, in my mind, almost absurd as trying to privatize air and access to air. Water is so important and so basic to life, right? All life comes from water, and all life in some way returns to water, or returns its water, its source of water back to the earth. And so we need to think about it also from that perspective, that privatization really is a threat on so many levels. It's a threat not just to access and affordability, but it's a threat to people who are thinking about access to water from a ritual or religious perspective. So I do want to also bring that aspect into it. So what do we need to do? How do we need to address water? Virginia IPL starting now this year, a campaign to raise awareness, educate residents in Virginia, and to see that, and hopefully see our legislature begin to take this issue more seriously and to acknowledge water as a common good, and acknowledge and pass a resolution to at least start there as a foundation and a grounding for human rights to water. And we're hoping that we see that resolution pass in the General Assembly 2021. But what else would we want to add to that? And you can, it's on the screen now. You can go to our page to see that and other policy issues that we are hoping to see prioritized and passed this GA 2021. Jorge, do you have others?
Yeah, of course. Besides really getting behind this resolution in Virginia that I think really puts an onus on really figuring out these issues around water scarcity, water affordability, water access in general. Food and Water Watch is also working at the national level with Congress. There's been a bill called the Water Act, the Water Affordability, Transparency, Equity, and Reliability Act, that would provide funding at $35 billion a year for technical assistance to help actually fund these programs, these modernization of the systems that I talked about, as well as to help rural, small municipalities, Native American communities improve their water and wastewater systems. It would also provide a grant program to replace all the lead piping and plumbing in public schools. It's a big issue. Right now, nationwide, there's about 6 million lead service lines delivering water to millions of people. So lead in school is an issue that is often in the press. And like I said, this is where municipalities find themselves in a really tough spot in trying to address it because it takes a major investment. So this Water Act right now has been sponsored by dozens of congressional members. And we think with the incoming President-elect Biden, who has committed to an investment in infrastructure, that this is the time to really, really take care of this water crisis that I mentioned at the beginning of the call that you and I obviously agree with is really, really urgent.
So what can our people who are listening to this show or who will be listening to this show, what do you want them to do? What action do you want them to take? I will answer what we want them to do after you have your opportunity as we begin to wrap up our discussion today.
The two things right now, and you already mentioned them, it's always very important that local elected officials hear from their constituencies. So I would say right now, if you are a resident of Virginia, it's to reach out. The Virginia General Assembly is beginning shortly here in January to reach out to them to stress that water is a human right and that you want this resolution to pass, as well as reaching out to your congressional member to say you support the Water Act because we do need to modernize our water systems and we need investments in ensuring clean, safe, affordable water. Mm-hmm. So right now, that is I think that the civic duty of all of us is to make sure that that investment happens.
Yeah. And so one of the things we're doing is we're right now soliciting volunteers to speak in the hearings, but also to reach out to their legislators to ensure that they know that this is an important issue, to bring it to their attention, to prioritize it, and to ask them to vote yes when the resolution comes up. We particularly are grateful for this conversation today. It's a second part, but we'll be having many more conversations and opportunities for people to engage. I did see a couple of questions coming in, but we're going to encourage, because we know we have to have a hard stop, but we're going to encourage those who have questions to either reach out to Jorge at his website at Food and Water Watch, or to Virginia IPL to go to our website to find out more information. Thank you so much, Jorge, for this first stop or this first step in this conversation. We know this is a long-term, multi-year campaign. If we're going to be proactive and protect the access, affordability, and actually keeping water clean and safe for everyone, for all residents of Virginia, but not just Virginia, for the nation and for our globe. So thank you, Jorge, for all the good work that you are doing and that you are planning to do in partnership with not just us, but other organizations who care about this issue.
Thank you, Faith.